We're live from New Delhi, watching DD India Live, India's voice to the world. I'm Lepakshi Khurana, coming up in the next 30 minutes. Iran denies Donald Trump's claim of nuclear negotiations progress, says no plans to hold talks. Meanwhile, Iran's Khamenei, in first reaction since ceasefire, vows never to yield to US pressure. European Union leaders discussed new proposals from the United States on a trade deal at a summit in Brussels as Trump's tariffs relaxation to expire on July 9th, which could hammer exporters from cars to pharmaceuticals. Congo and Rwanda to sign a peace deal in Washington, likely to end years of conflict with roots in Rwanda's 1994 genocide. India scripts history with title hat-trick in Asian Squash Double Championship, clinches all three titles, men's, women's and mixed doubles. And on to the details now. Iran denied it is set to resume nuclear talks with the United States after the end of a 12-day conflict with Israel and accused Washington of exaggerating the impact of US strikes. Iran's foreign ministry has firmly denied that any agreement has been reached to resume nuclear negotiations with the United States, warning that future discussions will be even more difficult following recent military strikes. President Trump had said on Wednesday that the US and Iran would meet next week, describing the recent Pentagon strikes on Iranian nuclear sites as a success. However, the White House walked back that claim on Thursday. Speaking on Iranian state television, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi dismissed reports of an imminent diplomatic breakthrough. Araghchi said the damages to nuclear sites were not little and that relevant authorities were figuring out the new realities of Iran's nuclear program. Araghchi also accused Washington of never intending to negotiate sincerely. He said the scheduled talks in Oman before Israel's attacks were evidence that the US was not acting in good faith. Well, European Union leaders met in Brussels on Thursday to review fresh US proposals for a potential trade deal. With a July 9th deadline approaching to avoid increased US tariffs threatened by President Donald Trump, EU nations are under pressure to find a united stance. The proposed tariffs could significantly hurt major European exporters, including the auto and pharmaceutical industries. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen confirmed that the EU had received a new draft from the US and was still evaluating it. She cautioned that there's a risk the negotiations could fail, emphasizing that all options remain on the table.
So our message today is clear. We are ready for a deal. At the same time, we are preparing for the possibility that no satisfactory agreement is reached. This is why we consulted on a rebalancing list, and we will defend the European interest as needed. In short, all options remain on the table.
Well, leaders were divided on whether to accelerate a deal or hold out for better terms. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz advocated for a quick and simple agreement, warning against unnecessary delays. He also expressed general support for finalizing the Mercosur deal with South America.
Ich habe deswegen auch mit den Kollegen zusammen gesagt, lass uns jetzt bitte schnell zu einer Lösung kommen. Ich habe unter anderem auch auf einzelne Industrien hingewiesen, die wir in Deutschland haben, die chemische Industrie, die pharmazeutische Industrie, der Maschinenbau, Stahl, Aluminium, Automobilindustrie, die werden zurzeit alle mit so hohen Zöllen belastet, dass das die Unternehmen wirklich gefährdet und deswegen lieber jetzt schnell und einfach als langsam und hochkompliziert. Wir müssen jetzt schnell zu einem Ergebnis kommen. Und darüber sind wir uns auch alle einig gewesen, da gibt es überhaupt keinen Dissens.
However, French President Emmanuel Macron disagreed, saying he could not endorse the Mercosur agreement in its present form. Macron, while in favor of a pragmatic and timely U.S. trade deal, insisted that any agreement must be fair and balanced.
Mon souhait, c'est que nous concluions rapidement, ce qui marque, et je peux le dire ici, il y a une vraie volonté des Européens, une bonne volonté de conclure. Mais cette bonne volonté ne doit pas être vue comme une faiblesse. Nous voulons conclure rapidement parce que c'est notre intérêt collectif et c'est bon pour la stabilité du commerce international et pour nos entreprises, mais on ne veut pas conclure vite à tout prix.
On the other hand, US President Donald Trump said on Thursday that America has signed a deal with China. Trump made the remarks while speaking at the Big Beautiful Bill event after talks in Geneva in May. Washington and Beijing had agreed to temporarily lower steep tit-for-tat tariffs on each other's products. China also committed to easing some non-tariff countermeasures, but US officials later accused Beijing of violating the pact and slow-walking export license approvals for rare earths. Both sides eventually agreed on a framework to move forward with their Geneva consensus following talks in London this month. Well, the White House also indicated that Washington could extend a July deadline when steeper tariffs impacting dozens of economies are due to kick in. That pause is set to expire on July 9th.
The deadline is not critical. The president can simply provide these countries with a deal if they refuse to make us one by the deadline, and that means the president can pick a reciprocal tariff rate that he believes is advantageous for the United States and for the American worker, and he will continue to do that. But as for the deals, our United States Trade Ambassador, Jameson Greer, I speak to him frequently. He's working very hard, and he has had very good and productive discussions with many of our key trading partners.
And moving on, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention panel of vaccine advisors voted on Thursday in the first official move after U.S. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. fired the committee's previous experts and replaced them with his own picks. They voted 5-1 in favor. The vote marked the first by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices since Kennedy abruptly fired all 17 members of the ACIP earlier this month, accusing them of conflicts of interest and replaced them with his own nominees. A majority of the committee approved updated recommendations for a new shot for respiratory syncytial virus or RSV and voted to urge Americans to avoid a small number of flu vaccines that use the preservative thimerosal despite evidence of its safety. Votes by the panel are closely watched by health authorities because they're tied to federal policies and programs that enable access to vaccines, including requirements for insurance coverage and funding to provide shots for uninsured children. Other vaccines were also being discussed by the panel but not voted on, including those for COVID-19 measles, chikungunya and anthrax. Kennedy's new committee also announced on Wednesday that it would start a renewed review of all recommended pediatric vaccines. And U.S. President Donald Trump's administration is planning to deport migrant Kilmer Abrigo for a second time, but did not plan to send him back to El Salvador, where he was wrongly deported in March. White House commented that the deportation will not happen until after Abrigo is tried in federal court on migrant smuggling charges. Earlier on Thursday, Justice Department lawyer Jonathan Guine said during a hearing in federal court in Maryland that the United States does not have imminent plans to remove Abrigo, a Salvadoran national, from the United States. If deported, Abrigo would be sent to a third country and not El Salvador. Abrigo was deported and imprisoned in El Salvador in March despite a 2019 judicial decision barring him from being sent there because of a risk of persecution. And Congolese and Rwandan officials are expected to sign a peace deal in Washington on Friday following a diplomatic push by U.S. President Donald Trump's administration to end years of conflict with roots in Rwanda's 1994 genocide. The agreement aims to attract Western investment to the two countries' mining sectors, which boast deposits of tantalum, gold, cobalt, copper and lithium while giving the U.S. access to critical minerals. Congolese negotiators have dropped a demand that Rwandan troops immediately leave Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, paving the way for a U.S. brokered peace agreement to be signed today. Rwanda has sent at least 7,000 soldiers over the border in support of the M23 rebels who seized eastern Congo's two largest cities and lucrative mining areas earlier this year. Rwanda has long denied providing arms and troops to M23 and says it is acting in self-defense. Washington was pushing for Rwanda to withdraw its troops before the deal signing, a precondition that was also included in a U.S.-prepared draft authenticated by the diplomats. And soldiers in Togo used tear gas and batons to disperse hundreds of protesters on Thursday who blocked main roads in the capital to call for the resignation of longtime leader Faure Gnassingbe. The gathering, organized by bloggers and activists, highlighted persisting political strife in Togo, where last month Gnassingbe was given the powerful new role of President of the Council of Ministers that has no fixed term limit. Protest organizers planned 3 days of demonstrations, but soldiers quickly dispersed the crowd on Thursday. In the suburbs of the capital, protesters set wooden furniture and tires on fire. Many shops stayed closed amid ongoing clashes. Gnassingbe had previously served for 2 decades as president, and opposition parties have described his new appointment as a constitutional coup that could extend his rule for life. Well, thousands of Argentine university teachers, students and staff marched towards the Ministry of Education on Thursday, carrying candles and torches to demand more funds for education. Nationwide protest erupted as demonstrators demanded better pay for university staff and the passage of a university funding law. Also, healthcare workers from one of Buenos Aires' leading medical centers marched through the city on Thursday to protest drastic budget cuts that are severely impacting hospital operations and leaving staff with wages that scarcely meet their basic needs. The protesters demanded immediate action to address the deepening crisis in the country's healthcare system. The protests highlight rising discontent with President Javier Milei's aggressive government spending cuts. Well, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, has called for tangible results in Sri Lanka's long-pending human rights cases. Wrapping up his visit, Turk lauded the government's steps to reopen key investigations, saying progress would boost public trust. He also urged legal reforms, calling for a moratorium on the Prevention of Terrorism Act and the repeal of the Online Safety Act.
The government has reopened investigations and prosecutions into some important cases, including the Easter Sunday attacks, and I encourage that these be advanced. Achieving results in at least some long-standing and representative human rights cases would have a powerful demonstrative and confidence-building effect. The new government has set a fundamental goal of national unity. Quick wins and confidence-building measures are key to enhancing trust and reconciliation. And my office remains ready to assist and provide assistance in this regard.
Well, the Greek firefighters on Thursday battled a wildfire that burned residences and holiday houses near the coastal town of Palaia, 40 kilometers south of Athens, forcing people to flee. In the area of Palaia, 130 firefighters were supported by 12 aircraft and 12 helicopters as they sought to put out flames that were whipped up by high winds. Fire brigade spokesperson said Greek police have moved to safety 40 people, adding that Coast Guard vessels had sailed to the area to assist with more evacuations if needed. Authorities said the risk of wildfires would remain high on Friday before the weather got cooler. Also, thunderstorms swept across France, killing 2 people, causing damage to property and cutting electricity. The French Civil Defense Agency said 1 person was critically injured in the storm, which broadly swept France after a heat wave. More than 100,000 households lost electricity across France. The Civil Security Office said the storm alert has also been lifted as of Thursday. Meanwhile, the French Parliament briefly suspended its sitting during a debate on the Middle East on Wednesday as water leaked into the chamber during the violent storms. A historic 11th century church in a Normandy village was severely damaged during a storm, with a bell tower collapsing onto the nave, ripping open the roof and damaging nearby graves in just 8 minutes. And still to come in this edition of DD India Live. Jaishankar holds key talks with Australian and Qatari counterparts ahead of crucial Quad meeting in Washington. Puri gears up for Jagannath Rath Yatra, extensive arrangements for smooth mobility in place. And Cristiano Ronaldo nearing 2-year extension with AI Al Nassr despite exit speculation. Welcome back, and moving on. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh held talks with his Chinese counterpart Admiral Doordarshan on the sidelines of the SCO Defense Ministers meeting in Qingdao. The leaders had a constructive and forward-looking exchange of views on issues pertaining to bilateral relations. Both also expressed happiness on restarting of the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra after a gap of nearly 6 years. It is incumbent on both the sides to maintain this positive momentum and avoid adding new complexities in the bilateral relationship. Also ahead of the key meeting of the Quad in Washington, D.C. next week, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar held a phone conversation with his Australian counterpart Penny Wong. Sharing on social media platform X, he wrote, and I quote, "A good discussion with FM Senator Wong of Australia before we head out for the Quad next week, exchanged views on a bilateral cooperation and the Indo-Pacific," unquote. Separately, Dr. S. Jaishankar also held a phone conversation with Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani. Al Thani is also Qatar's foreign minister. The leaders appreciated his assessment of the regional situation. They also discussed bilateral agenda. The Quad foreign ministers meeting in Washington, D.C. is likely to broadly deliberate on the agenda for the annual summit of the grouping. The summit is expected to deliberate on specific steps to bolster cooperation in the maritime domain. And now updates from Axiom 4 mission. Dragon spacecraft was successfully docked with International Space Station. Shubhanshu Shukla has scripted history as he becomes the first Indian to reach International Space Station and second in space after Rakesh Sharma. More in this report. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition and
liftoff. And with this, India took another giant leap in the space sector. With the docking of the Axiom 4 Dragon spacecraft, Indian astronaut Group Captain Shubhanshu Shukla made history by becoming the first Indian to enter the International Space Station. Along with India's Shubhanshu Shukla, aboard the spacecraft are 3 astronauts from Poland, Hungary and the United States. The docking procedure connected the spacecraft with the International Space Station's Harmony module.
Final approach and is go for docking. Monitor per steps 5 and 6 and 1.102.
The process began with a calibrated approach followed by the docking, orchestrated after a series of orbital maneuvers. After the docking, the hatch of the spacecraft was unlocked and the 4-member crew moved into the ISS.
Their first visit to the International Space Station as well. It is a privilege to be amongst the few who have got the chance to see the Earth from a vantage point that I have been able to see now. It has been a wonderful ride. It has been great. The minute I entered the International Space Station and you guys, this crew, you just made me feel so welcome, as if you literally opened your doors, like your house doors for us. That's true. But it was fantastic.
Indian astronaut Shubhanshu Shukla's family also watched the docking process. His parents got emotional as they watched the live telecast at their son's school in Uttar Pradesh's Lucknow along with other students and teachers.
बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है। अब ये अंदर चले गए, अब कोई दिक्कत नहीं। वापसी का इंतजार रहेगा कि जल्दी से आए, जल्दी से मिले आके हम लोगों से, उसी का इंतजार है।
खुशी है बहुत, अपने को जो है बहुत अच्छा महसूस कर रहे हैं। बच्चे ने सफल उसके जो है डॉकिंग हुई है, इसके लिए हम जो है ईश्वर को बहुत बहुत जो है धन्यवाद करते हैं। बहुत
इंडिया के लिए बहुत प्राउड मोमेंट है। हम डेस्परेटली वेट कर रहे थे कि डॉकिंग हो, सेफली वो पहुंचे और उसकी डॉकिंग हो, एंड वो हमने भी देखा, एंड आई एम सो हैप्पी कि वो डॉकिंग भी सेफली हो गई है।
Indian Minister Jitendra Singh also watched the docking process live. Soon after, the minister lauded India's space journey and congratulated Group Captain Shukla and other astronauts on the successful docking.
We started our space journey much later compared to the United States or even the Soviet Union. But today, our credibility, the trustworthiness of our capacities has risen to such an extent that it is our talent which is being looked forward to for a collaboration which would benefit others as well. So I think that's a huge change from what it was till a few years back and it is today.
Shukla's trip marks the start of a new phase in India's space program, where human space flight would become as routine as satellite launches. Axiom Mission 4 will not only conduct major researches but also promote space outreach activities to encourage the next generation of Indian scientists.
This time around, India has been entrusted to perform the most critical part of the expedition, the crucial experiments, particularly those related to life sciences, the various functions or dysfunctions likely to happen with regard to the human physiology. And this is something which is going to have a very critical bearing on all the future expeditions across the world.
The Axe for crew successfully lifted off on June 25th. The crew will now spend about 14 days aboard the orbiting lab, completing at least 60 science investigations and STEM outreach events. Tripti Tripathi's report for DD India.
And on to some sports news now. India's cricket history and the ongoing Asian Squash Double Championship in Kuala Lumpur, securing top podium finish in all three categories, men's, women's and mixed doubles. The top-seeded men's pair of Abhay Singh and Velavan Senthil Kumar beat their Pakistani opponents, Noor Zaman and Nasir Iqbal, in the summit clash. In the women double final, second seeds Joshna Chinnappa and Anahat Singh outplayed Malaysia's Aina Amani and Yishin Ying, too, in the title clash. Also, the top-seeded mixed double pair of Abhay and Anahat made it a clean sweep of title for India as they beat Malaysia's Rochelle Arnold and Amishin Raj Chandran 2-0 in the summit showdown. And Cristiano Ronaldo is close to agreeing a new contract with Saudi Arabian club Al Nassr. Ronaldo's deal was due to expire at the end of June, but sources indicate a two-year extension is close to being finalized. Ronaldo posted on social media the chapter is over following the Riyadh club's final Saudi Pro League game of the season last month, leading to speculation he was set to leave. FIFA President Gianni Infantino then raised the prospect of him joining a team involved at the Club World Cup after Al Nassr's failure to qualify for the extended tournament which is being held in the United States. And now let's take you live. We're getting you visuals from Puri in Odisha, where the stage is all set for the annual chariot festival of Jagannath Rath Yatra, a divine journey of Lord Jagannath, Lord Balabhadra and Devi Subhadra and Lord Sudarshana with rituals. Lakhs of devotees are expected to gather for the sacred Rath Yatra. All right, that's all for this edition of DD India Live, but let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. For those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on the DD India mobile app. The app is available on both Android and iOS platforms. Scan the QR code in the screen to download now. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Lipakshi Khurana from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India Live.